Welcome back, listeners, to the latest episode of the BSB podcast. Today, we're journeying to Cobb County to explore the corniest Broadway musical on the scene, Shucked. But before we dive into the story and characters of this corn-poppin' musical, like, follow, and subscribe to us on all social media platforms. Spoiler warning, we are talking about the North American touring production of Shucked, so if you haven't seen this show yet, then hop on your John Deere tractor and mosey on out of here. But if you're still here, welcome to the farm. Let's get started. So, RJ, this is one of those shows that when we heard about it a while ago, all we knew about it was that it was about corn. But prior to walking into this show, how much did you actually know about Shucked? As this show was on the Tonys 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I can't remember exactly. So it's been a while since it was on Broadway. What did you know about the show before walking into it here at the Fisher Theater?
Corn.
Corn. That is it. What is it about the show that is so secretive?
Well, I mean, of course, like, it's a newer show still. And,
Sure.
like, now knowing the show, I'm not sure that there is much more to say aside from corn. Um, because otherwise I could imagine that the synopsis would sound very similar to other shows.
Correct.
Like high-level generic rom-com is how, like, I perceive it to be marketed. So
I remember a while back, somebody that I had known was talking to me about the show, and they're like, "Have you seen the marketing for it?" And I was just like, "I've seen marketing for it, but it doesn't tell you much more than corn. Like, that's what it is." And the way they described it was that basically it is the Music Man, but told with corn. And they're like, and that's why they're literally not telling you anything, because like they don't want to say we're the Music Man with corn. And when you boil it down after seeing the show, that's exactly what the story is. It's basically just the Music Man.
yeah, I mean, obviously we'll get into it, but I think it grapples with many themes from a couple different musicals, with Music Man being the plot is very much in alignment. But I saw sneak pieces of other shows, and yeah, it's not always a good look to be like, oh, it's like just this show, but like with corn.
Right, which I feel like this is part of, and we'll talk about the humor in a little bit because I think that's such an important part of the story. But I think that as a show, it leaned really heavy on its humor of all different levels to kind of hide some of the fact that this story had a lot of themes and pieces from other shows that it was just kind of reusing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which of course technically does fall into the identity that they wanted it to have, a comedy about corn. They did technically succeed.
They did. They did. Also, listeners, if you have been paying attention, that's probably like 7 times we said the word corn. So if you want to make it a game and tell us how many times we say the word corn by the end of this, that'd be swell. So jumping into the book of Shucked, this is by Robert Horn, who wrote the book to Tootsie the Musical, the Broadway musical, as well as 13 the Musical on Netflix, Teen Beach Movie 1 and 2, Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure, The Sweet Life movie, to name a few of the Disney Channel original movies that he worked on. So truly this feels like comedy and humor was at the forefront when writing this story. It feels like they were really trying to make a show that was easily accessible, which I will say it did pretty well. This was a show that I think that anybody could go see, like a Book of Mormon. Anybody at any level could go see this and appreciate it and not feel too overwhelmed with the Broadway like style of a show. But right off the bat, when you hear like a filmography or like a show, like the shows that someone wrote like that, what does that kind of tell you about a show right away? Like you have, like I said, Tootsie and all these Disney Channel original movies.
I mean, full transparency, I did not grow up with said Disney movies. I mean, they were happening when I was growing up, but we didn't have cable, so I did not watch them. Um, but same idea, kind of like young audience geared, or like the generation feels the same. Like what I know of those movies and what I know of the show and the other musicals, that it feels right. You've got a whole bunch of dad jokes thrown in, or over the top, just ideals, which also many those shows and films also a tad over the top. But
Absolutely.
what was it?
It's almost like a genre of like, again, I don't want to compare it to any other show, but Book of Mormon kept coming to mind, where it was just like so over the top, making jokes of something. Like a lot of the jokes were super sexual in this show. This is not necessarily a show for families of all ages, but there was a lot of these pieces where it's just like, okay, you just want us, you're throwing so many jokes at us to make us laugh because you know that like not all of them are going to stick as well, you know? But I guess that digresses from the humor, and we want to talk about the story at first. So when I was writing this up, I struggled with trying to think of who the main character was of the show. I get that it was an ensemble piece. I get that it was following lots of different people, but it felt like they were trying to have Maisie be the person the person whose story it was. But truthfully, I feel like the narrator 1 and 2 were the main characters of the story. So I was having a really hard time of like, how do I classify this? Where do I go? How do I start telling a story from this? Whose story do you think that this is?
I mean, I would agree that the break up of focus, are we telling like the storytellers, they are what they are, right? They're storytellers. So I don't know that I can consider this to be their story because they're
Okay.
telling it. I do think technically, I mean, yeah, it's an ensemble piece. I think it is the story of Cobb County.
Okay. So like that's the main character.
Maisie is the most utilized character. Mm, I mean, I would say she probably is the main character if we had to choose one. But with the supporting cast being very, very close, like there wasn't like a big discrepancy between her and everybody else. Like it was very, very close in proximity.
Sure, absolutely. You know, just to give listeners a little bit of an idea, you mentioned storyteller 1 and 2. This is definitely a frame story where we're having two people who are stepping inside the story and outside the story. They're kind of ensemble members, but they're really narrating what's happening to Maisie. And when I was kind of developing the sheet, I kind of came to this idea that like it's interesting that Act 1 seems to be more Maisie's story, like linearly, where the second one felt more like an ensemble piece. So for the first act, we have Maisie about to get married. The corn starts to die in Cobb County, which that's what they're kind of known for. They're surrounded by corn. Their whole environment's corn. And then she leaves to go find a corn doctor who happens to be a con man, which is where the Music Man vibes come in for a second. But it was interesting because in that first piece, it really was her story. And all of a sudden in Act 2, it was like we were focusing on Bo. We were focusing on uh, not Maya, sorry. We were focusing on Lulu, you know, and we were focusing on all these different characters. And Maisie was still a part of that. But I felt like there was almost two separate identities of storytelling going on between Act 1 and Act 2. At least from my opinion, it kind of felt like that.
Yeah, I think the setup required Maisie to be the focal point of Act 1 because then obviously Act 2 doesn't really happen. I think a lot of the plot points happen to her specifically, which makes it feel like she's the main character. Um, when really, again, they're all generally, especially in Act 2, kind of coming together. They all have their standout moments, right? It felt very equitable in regards to like, oh, we have Maisie, then we have Bo, then we have Lulu, then we have, just down the line comparatively to just like always coming back to Maisie. But I think technically, didn't they call it a fable, right?
They did.
So interesting because I feel like just off the top of my head, when I think of fables, I don't know that there's typically one, you know, main character. Like it's usually a group realizing the same thing.
Correct. And I think what's interesting, like what you're saying there, is without Maisie going to find Gordy, who is the con man, and bringing him back, Like the story wouldn't have gone anywhere. Like she had to be the one to journey out and do that for the rest of the city, like the rest of the town to grow. Um, Metaphorically and actually speaking. Um, and so she is the catalyst for that. But she becomes almost less important as the story goes on, as it becomes more of like a love square, that's what the story ends up coming in the second story. And so I should think it's just interesting because I was like, okay, there's clearly like there is a linear line here, but it felt like it could almost be two different shows. Like they were connected, but they were definitely told differently in how we were looking at it. At least that's kind of what stuck out to me.
Well, yeah, in the line of like you're taking someone, and there were a couple different plot points, right? Like part of it was the growth and development of an individual, where Act Two is more so the growth and development of an entire community, based on the fact that this one person pushed them outside of their stereotypical comfort zone or boundaries. So it's kind of like a domino effect, if you will.
Sure, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that because they all talk about how you do the same thing. Like you don't leave, you don't go and find answers. Everything you need is right here, which was giving me some Moana vibes, at the very beginning where the dad's kind of like, everybody stays here. The community takes care of you. We are the answers. Why are you trying to find something outside of here? And Maisie's very much like we can't solve a problem that A, we don't know about, and B, that like we've never dealt with this before. And so I think that was my first bit of like, oh, here's one of the movies I'm really feeling. And maybe that's just because I've watched Moana so many times. That's what like resonated with me the most in that piece. But I think that was, like I said, the first time that I felt like, oh, here's a piece of a different movie that I'm noticing picking up here. And so then we move into the Music Man. So Maisie finds Gordy, who is a shady man, who owes a lot of money, a lot of debts. And he sees a get rich quick scheme by coming and taking these rocks that are important to the storyline because they're absorbing all the water. Sorry, spoiler alert. Which I thought that it was going to be opposite. I was almost banking on the fact that these rocks were going to be like, because the grandpa took the 3 rocks from there, they were no longer giving power to the dirt. But that is not the story here. And basically he comes back there and tries to con them all to getting these rocks and to take them from them. And some people are very hyper fixated on the fact that he's a crook and they can feel it, and some people are not. What did you think of The Music Man Part 2?
Yeah, I mean, it was fine. It's not my favorite storyline, um, but I think that also just comes the cringiness of the timeline of someone meeting someone else and then going with them to their hometown, and then all the things that happen after that in the midst of obviously him being a con man and this like kind of false remorse, which then becomes like potentially actual remorse. It maybe it's just because it's like the age old tale, uh, and it was like incredibly predictable, um, just with additional humor.
So it was funny because as we're watching this, I'm always, the psychologist in me is just like, always wondering like how it's going to be taken by the people near us. And, our guests seem to have a great time. But there was moments where I was just like, this is a lot of the stuff that I know RJ doesn't like care for in a show. You're not always a big like joke after joke. You don't necessarily always love a love story. And that's what this kind of turned out to be. But also it was just following a lot of tropes. Cause I agree with you. She goes to Tampa, finds this guy who looks like he's probably a good 20 years older than she is. Kisses him, brings him back, and is engaged in like 3 days and getting married. And I was just like, and nobody's batting an eyelash but Lulu. And I was like, in this moment, I was like, am I turning into a dad here? Am I turning into a doll where I'm just like, Lulu's the smart one here? All the rest of you are just kind of being silly. They fell into a lot of those traps. And part of me is like, okay, what's the charm of Shucked? Is it kind of like recently, I went and saw a very Farmington and a very Northville Christmas, and they're like making fun of Hallmark movies, but part of the charm is that we're poking fun at something that we all know is ridiculous. Is that what this is trying to do? Or is it the fact that we are supposed to buy into this a little bit, and that's not one of the comedic elements that we're talking about here? Where do you feel like these tropes are falling in? Do you feel like they're meant to be poking fun at themselves?
Yeah, I think it's so extreme that it's just, which is why it's stacked with humor on top of it. And so, granted, I mean, there were moments that I definitely enjoyed. I think um, the pacing was hit or miss for some scenes, but even though it may have been a tad predictable, it's a tad predictable because, like, that's what people like.
Sure.
um, and
Like, it's not a
so,
bad thing.
yeah, and we like to make fun of it, right? So, like, it even within itself, it was making fun, blatantly making fun of itself, but then even verbally, some of those lines that were delivered and the facial expressions that were delivered were like basically egging you on to be rolling your eyes because of how insane whatever the situation was. And yes, Lulu with the sensibility at some points, maybe not in others, um, but more so the voice of truth throughout the show.
I do want to just say real quick, listeners, I always feel like I throw RJ under the bus, but I'm like, this is not usually your favorite kind of thing. And he's always like, no, no, like, that's not what it is. He truly loves theater. I want you to know that. Like, theater is one of his passions. There's just that, and I don't mean it by that. I think this is a show that we both enjoyed in different pieces. Again, don't want to speak for you. Obviously, that there was one part I was laughing so hard I was crying, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that there are aspects of the show that are ridiculous because they're meant to be ridiculous. Like, they're meant to be, um the word farcical is coming to mind, but that's not the right word. But like, over the top. We know what it is. It's predictable because it's comfortable, and it's comfortable because it's predictable. You know what I mean? And so I think part of going back to the marketing, when you try to just kind of hide what's behind there, you're bringing people in and you're giving them something that they're going to enjoy. But like, it's really hard to market almost a show when you're like, these are all the things that it is. It's the Music Man. It's Moana. It's this musical. Like, the story is predictable. Like, you don't want to like do that because that's something that almost needs to be experienced. I'm probably rambling here. That makes no sense, but do you know what I mean?
I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a comedy show on stilts. Like,
Correct.
I think that the one-liners and the dad jokes, like, this is the rhetoric was something I would expect to hear if I were going to have a drink at a bar that's a comedy club. Um, which is also why I wouldn't recommend bringing your children. I mean, you could, but it'll all be over their head. Um,
There were some jokes that took me a minute, as you remember, where I was just like, oh, I did not get that at first. It took me a moment to really process it.
yeah, like you really have to be in the you have to be right there with what they're saying every time because and there was so much humor and that it's very like there were some moments that they paused because they knew that it would either take people a minute or it would just people needed to laugh. But there were others where like they were stacked, and so you were like two jokes behind trying to figure that one out, but we're already three jokes ahead. Um,
And many different layers of comedy, too. We're like, I'm just going to say, people, there are a lot of the jokes are dick jokes. There are a lot of sex jokes. And sometimes they're really blatant, like, we know what we're talking about. And there's some that you actually have to think about being like, oh, I got it. Wait a second. Like, and there is a lot of those. So, like, again, if you want to take your mom, by all means, just be prepared for the fact that you're going to have an interesting conversation on the other end of it. And I think it also, again, it speaks to the people that you're bringing. Everybody has different kinds of jokes that they like. They have different levels of jokes. They want innuendos. They want the ones that you have to think about. This show provides that all, but it's at a breakneck speed. It's like if you put four stand-up comedians together in a room and say, have a show. And they're all just laying joke after joke after joke, And that's not a bad thing, but it is a lot. It's a lot of humor, and that's a lot of jokes coming at you while you're also having a show that has music in it. And that can be a lot.
yeah, and as we will get into in our next episode, um, does the music attribute to the comedy? Does the comedy attribute to the music?
Who knows?
We'll find out.
We don't know. um, but of the story, RJ, what worked for you? Like, what of this story did you actually appreciate?
The pacing, while it was some of it was a detriment, it equally like it moved along. Like and you need it to move along. Um, especially Act Two, like flip like I don't know what the actual timing is on Act Two, but it flew. And I appreciated that it wasn't so overloaded with like minute detail. Like we needed to get a grasp. We were moving through such little time and yet so much time because we were basically living all day with these characters in their timeline. Um,
I will say this about the show too. Just to harken back to what you're saying, that so when we sat down for Act Two, it was 9 o'clock. Okay. So it was about an hour and 15 minutes for the first act, a 15-minute intermission, and 9 o'clock, pretty much on the dot, we sat down. And just for those who are wondering too, they opened right at the time that the show was opening. Like they did not wait. They did not like they were like, we have a time crunch here. We sat down at 9 o'clock, and at 9:55, we were already standing for closing for bows, which usually we're not standing up until about 10:15 ish is usually because I usually check my watch just to see how long it's been. So we were a good 15-20 minutes ahead of what a normal show would end. That second act was a breakneck act. Like we were in and out. They finished their story. We were done. And then you were like it was crazy how fast we got out of Act Two. So the pacing, yes, top notch to that.
well, yeah, it didn't get bogged down. Like they did what they came to do. The book and music did what they came to do, and you're grateful. You're like, I don't need another ballad. I don't need another high energy song. I don't need another scene of somebody crying or having a heart to heart. I just need one, and then move on.
Which I do want to give props to Act Two as well, is that when they lifted the curtain, so to speak, for Act Two, it started exactly where it was. And there wasn't like a let's rehash what happened. It was just like and we're picking up and we're moving on. And so like they had like comedy wise, pacing wise, that story was tight. And I will give it that. Um Overall with the humor, did you like the humor? Did you not like the humor? I know there's probably aspects you did like and you didn't like, but like overall, what was your feel on that?
I would say it was good. I mean,
Okay.
I think I would feel differently. I I think depending on who you attend the show with will determine how you feel about the humor. Um, like I said, like I want to go see that show with my family, my mother, my sister, whoever. No, absolutely not. Do not want to
No.
be sitting next to them. Do I want to go with a group of friends after a couple drinks? Yeah, I probably think I'm probably pissing myself because it's so funny. So it's just two very different. Like you have to know and that's what you have to kind of expect. So I guess I appreciated the humor for what it was. It's not always my cup of tea. I think did we need 17 dick jokes? Probably not. We could have gotten away with like five, but I understand what they were trying to do.
Again, it's kind of like watching South Park or watching Book of Mormon. I used to love watching South Park. I still enjoy Book of Mormon. RJ, if you would have brought your mom and your sister, or if I would have brought my mom, I would have been mortified sitting. I would have been red in the face and I would have been like stock still, not moving, like, don't talk to me. Like, I would have felt very awkward. And so I'm glad that, like, obviously, this is a show in which you should have the right environment of people with you. Like, you should have, we brought some great people with us. They were laughing their butts off and they were enjoying themselves. And that made me enjoy it more. Um, my mom would not have laughed at half those jokes. And I wouldn't have wanted her to laugh at half those jokes. And so, um, right before we go on to their performances as well, I do want to ask you, did you like this narration style? I actually think I was a fan of the the frame storytelling that they used with the storyteller 1 and 2. I won't get into how they're connected to the story. I do think that it was an interesting way to have something to help move the story along without having it all happen on stage. Like there was moments in Act 2 where they're like at a bar and they're like jumping from like 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute later, like all these parts, and like it added to the comedy, and it also added to the overall feeling, and I really liked that. I felt like that's what kind of made Shucked enjoyable for me, were these two individuals.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think there's any other way to do it aside from the way that they did, because there's way too much missing. There's too much empty space for us to be jumping as much as we were jumping, whether that was timeline wise or just kind of setting up the scene. Um, and honestly, a good way when you have those kind of interactive, like where they jump in and out of the story, obviously it helps with casting ultimately. Like you don't need like an additional 6 people to play the roles that they were playing,
Hmm.
um, for 2-3 lines.
Right.
Um,
It kind
but
of reminded me of Anne Juliet, where Shakespeare and his wife were jumping in and out of the story. And like that felt like a really cool thing because I don't know, it brought the story to life a little bit more. Like I don't know how to put words to it, but I liked the effect of like we're outside the story, but then also we can step into it and we could be a part of the numbers if we want to. And like by the time you get to the end, there is a connection to the story that it all makes sense, and I really did love that. So I think that there was a lot of beauty to having the storyteller 1 and 2, and obviously the Maya and Joe deserve big props for being those two roles because they were fantastic.
yeah, and I think audiences feel more connected to a show when that happens. Like you're kind of rooting for that person, especially when they're breaking the fourth wall, which they do. Um, and just feeling like you somehow know, like obviously you're getting to know their character as the show is going on. So then it kind of feels more personal,
Hmm.
when and if anything happens at the end. Um, but there's more investment, I think, in general.
For sure, for sure. Before we close out this episode, I do want to give a shout out to Mickey Abraham, who played Lulu, who was absolutely one of my favorite characters in the show, as well as Quinn Vandertwerp, who played Gordy. He also was a real standout for me. But was there anybody from this cast that really was giving, like, in your opinion, was giving their all, really stood out to you from Shucked?
I mean, honestly, they were all great. I don't know that there was really one standout because all of them had powerhouse vocals, and honestly, like equal parts. Like I felt like all of the characterizations and all of the stage time were pretty equal and difficult in their own right. So yeah, I mean, I love, um, independently owned as a song, and so of course love just love that portrayal of Lulu. But really, I thought everyone was great.
You know, there is one cast member that could use a little bit more time on the stage. And it was probably the most important cast member in the entire show. Um, Nick Bailey's abs probably needed more stage time than they had. This is disappointing. Shucked. Why are you doing this to us? 2 minutes, Max. Come on. Disappointing.
We know who Brian was looking at the entire time.
Well, I will
What
never live down this.
beginning of Act 2? I'm trying to
Yes.
remember when that happened.
Yeah, it wasn't long into Act 2 where that happened.
Um, immediately awake after your intermission snack.
Yes.
Just
I mean, I didn't even need my nose ring. Wide alert. Alert. I was like, hello, welcome to the show. It's nice of you guys to have joined. We're glad to have you. So um that being said, we are running out of time, so stay tuned for our part 2 discussion of Shucked. Thanks again for joining us here in our box seats. Until next curtain call.